Hello and welcome to Artisan Stitch. I'm Jen. This video will cover how to put in a zip into a piped cushion. So we have this piped cushion here, and on the back, quite near the bottom, I like to put my zip fastening here. So I've not found it possible to put one in right at the bottom using this method. Right along here because the piping gets in the way, so I prefer to cut my back of the cushion in two sections and put the zip a little bit further up. So we're roughly talking about 3/4 of the way down the cushion, so 3/4 and 1/4. The seam allowance I'm going to use for this is 2 centimetres on either edge, so that means you need to cut your cushion back 4 centimetres longer in total than the front piece, and then you cut that into two sections. Here I've prepared my two back sections. The upper is the larger piece and the back lower section is the smaller piece. I have already overlocked along these edges, but you can use zigzag if you don't have an overlocker or don't want to use one. My zip is roughly 2 inches smaller on each side, on each end, than the width of my cushion. I'm going to begin by placing the two sections right sides together, and I'm going to take my zip. Now I want to mark out the centre section where the zip is going to go. So I'm going to roughly centre my zip on the two pieces, leaving an equal amount at either end. So that's about there, and I have started with the bottom of the zip at the top. Now the seam allowance I've mentioned is going to be 2 centimetres. I don't need to worry about that at the moment. All I'm concerned about at this stage is getting the zip positioned roughly central. So I'm going to take my marking pencil. So this is a fabric marker that will come out with the iron. I'm just going to part the tape, the little tails of the bottom of the zip, and make a mark. So you notice I'm keeping that mark a few millimetres away from the metal. And I'm going to do the same at the other end of the zip. Again, I'm going to part it and make a marking there. Again, a few centimetres, a few millimetres, about 5 millimetres to be precise, away from the bottom. Now I can put that aside for the time being, and I'm going to stitch right down this side. Now these two ends are going to be completely closed. The middle section will obviously open up so you can use the zip, but for the time being we are going to tack this. Now tacking on the machine is just using a long stitch, which makes it easier to remove. So I'm going to sew this end at 2.5 millimetres, my regular stitch length. I'm going to change to 4 millimetres, a long stitch, tack right down to here till this next blue dot. Then I'm going to again change my stitch length back to 2.5 millimetres and stitch the rest. Every time I transition my stitch length, I'm going to do a reverse stitch to secure it. Now is when I can pay attention to my seam allowance. So I've positioned the edge of the fabric at my 20 millimetre mark, so that will give me a 2 centimetre seam allowance, 20 millimetres. I'm going to start with a little bit of reverse and sew down to the blue dot. I'm using 2.5 millimetre stitch length. Right, got to the blue dot, I'm going to a little bit reverse. So the tacking will be taken out, and when the tacking comes out we want the little seam at each end to be a standalone strong seam. So stitch length up. Now I'm also going to turn my tension right down on the top thread. let's see, that's about somewhere between 1 and 2. So the rule of thumb is the lower the number, the looser the thread. That will just make it easier to take the tacking out, but I will have to remember to turn the tension up when I want to do my regular sewing. So tacking. Right, next blue dot, stitch length back down, tension back up, usually about 4 or 4.5 is your regular tension on the top thread. Now some reverse stitches. Stitch the bottom, some more reverse. Okay, so that's my first seam done. I'm now going to go and press that. First of all, I'm just going to run the steam iron over that seam. This will do something called melding, which is just driving the thread into the fabric. So the thread is really becoming part of the fabric. Now that will get us a nice crisp seam. Then I'm going to turn my seam allowances to the left and press again, creating a sharp crease. And this will be a little flat. So all the way down that seam. So next I'm putting pressure on the fabric to pull that seam really open so it's nice and flat. Lying level and flat, and a bit more at the top. Right, so we have the back of the cushion, this is the upper back, smaller at the bottom, 2 seam allowances pressed upwards. Now the next stage is really where the whole magic of this process works. I'm going to flip over to the other side. Let's do it this way. Okay, so I've got my larger upper side here. I'm going to take this seam allowance, so the one that's at the top, I'm going to kind of peel that. I'm not opening it out completely flat. I'm going to push it a little bit. So I'm creating a fold, and this little fold under here should be between 4 and 5 millimeters. So no smaller than 4, because we're going to stitch 1/2 of the zip to it, and if it's too small that will be very difficult. No larger than 5, because if it is, it will push the zip too far out to one side. So this whole process revolves on getting this measurement quite accurate. So there we go. And if you're still working in old money, that's less than 1/4 of an inch. So that, oh, it's hot. I think slightly small in this section, so I'm just going to roll it with my fingers a little bit so it's larger. So there we go. See that ridge? Right, back to the machine. So here is the back of my cushion. I'm going to take this fold, this little fold we've created here, and flip it so the cushion is now lying on my left. I'm going to take my zip, lay it on the table, face up, upside down. So the bottom of the zip is at the top. I'm then going to take my little flange and place it onto the zip. Now again, we're centering the zip. So bear in mind where we put our little blue dots. If you want to look for your dots that actually under here, there is there under this little fold. So if you want to look for them, you can put a pin through there. And on this one is here. So a pin through there. And there, that's the initial position that we marked. So that means that we're going to be avoiding all the dangerous parts of the zip. We're not going to be trying to stitch through the metal or the nylon teeth. Now I'm going to just pin my zip on that little flange there. So I've put the fold quite close to the teeth, but it's not touching the teeth. You can just about get a thumbnail in there. And I've not used an excessive amount of pins either. Right, to the machine. Now to successfully sew in a zip, okay, you're not going to do it with a standard foot, because the standard foot has this hole through the centre, which means that if I want to sew on this edge here, the foot will have to sit there, so it's sitting on a very uneven surface and it's very unstable. Right, zip feet are specially shaped so they can make the whole process a lot easier. Now, this is the one for my machine, quite chunky, but it's designed so it's got these two little nicks at each side, and this whole foot sits off to the side of the zip, and I'm going to sew down that edge. Here's another zip foot. This one's from an old Singer. Again, this one will be running it down there, and we'll be stitching along that side. This design of zip foot is a very common one these days. This is the shape which comes with most Janomis and Brothers, and also modern Singers. So this sort of double-sided, I suppose. It's got this little cutout of it. So this one we will be using like that. We'll be using the right hand side of the foot initially, and underneath this shape of zip there's this little sort of trough, so that means that this back half of the foot actually will sit over the teeth, so it doesn't touch them, and we can sew down the front side of the zip foot. So whatever style of zip foot you have, it doesn't matter, they all do the same job. Except is knowing how to use them properly, because using the right tool for the job makes the job much easier. So you see the edge of the foot is going to run just down along the edge of the fabric, and I'm stitching on this little flange, so I'm going to make sure that I don't cross the seam. So I'm starting at the back, which is actually the bottom of the zip. I'm going to reverse stitch to secure my stitching. I'm using my regular 2.5mm stitch length. And I'm just taking out the pins as I go, and just following the edge of the fabric. now when I come down to the bottom near the zip pull, you can see that the foot is very likely to hit this. So what I'm going to do is, my favourite tip when working with zips, put my needle in, just in the fabric to hold everything in place, raise my presser foot, that lets me open the zip, and I can continue. When I come to the bottom of the fabric and the zip tape, I'm just going to do some reverse. Okay. So that's the first half of my zip stitched in. And then for the second stage, but before that, I'm just going to get rid of these little tails of thread. I like to be especially tidy when working with zips, because if you leave lots of trailing threads, they'll just get caught in your work and possibly caught into the teeth. So I'm going to take what I have now, flip the large side over. Now we have to sew this sort of envelope shape, this letterbox shape, around the zip, right round and out with the zip. So what we're doing, we're attaching the zip, the seam allowance and the top layer of fabric all together. Now you notice when I flip this over, the seam allowance, if you get that first measurement correct on the ironing board, the seam allowance should be lying neatly along the edge of the zip tape. So that's why it's quite important that you take a little bit of care to get that measurement correct. Right, and I want to sew through three layers. Now, there's two problems here, two issues. First one, we can't see what we're doing because obviously the zip's covered up. There are danger points here, obviously we've got the zip metal and the teeth. We don't want to be sewing through them, we want to sew around the outer side of the zip. So again, we need to go to our little marking points. Now I can feel where the metal is, and I want to mark out with that. And I also want to make sure that I catch in these little tails. Again, my blue mark's under here, but if you just look at the back, I want to decide and put a pin, so I want to sew round about there, so we're catching in the tail. So I'm just going to pop a pin at that end and do the same here. Work it from the back. I want to be sewing across approximately halfway down between the end of the zip tapes themselves and the zip pull, but also want to make sure that we're catching that little tail in, that we don't let that escape out like that. We want that to tuck in and be caught into that seam allowance. So again, I'm going to pop a pin in across that way to hold that in place. Now that's purely as a marking point for the time being. So the other issue is that we're sewing completely blind and we have no guideline to sew straight. So one of my top tips is to find yourself some masking tape or some sticky tape. Now I find 12mm is just the perfect width. So I'm going to start where I have my pin. Okay, so one end of the tape goes right up to the point I've marked with my pin. Take that out now. I'm going to lay the tape right down the seam. So the left hand edge of the tape goes down the seam. Here I have the lump of the zip pull. So again, the tape's covering all that up down to the next pin. And I can cut my tape there. So the tape is performing two tasks. The first one is it's basically covering up our no-go zone. Okay, the danger zone, we don't want to sew anywhere on this tape. Secondly, we have a nice parallel line, parallel to the seam, where you can get a nice straight line. So that's your guide, your sewing guide. I'm going to leave this pin in here to the bitter end because that's holding this little tail in. As I say, we don't want that escaping. Might even put another one in a little bit further up. Right, okay. So, as I said, I'm going to sew through 3 layers. I can actually feel the ridge. There it is, there's my seam allowance. So I want to sew through there and through into the zip tape. So back to the machine. This time I need to use the other side of my foot. Okay, I want to use this side, so I'm going to remove the foot, change it over. Now, I want to do some tacking again. Tacking is your friend, it holds everything in place. So again, long stitch. I'm also going to reduce my top tension back to about 1.5. Now, all I want to do is secure all these layers together. So I'm going to use the edge of the tape along the edge of my zip foot, just do a few stitches across the short end, about 1 stitch beyond the tape. Now, needle in, pivot round, and I'm lined up to come down the edge of the tape. So, now you notice that I'm getting this fabric sort of ruffling up. That's just because of the lump that this teeth creates. So this is where your fabric management skills are called into play. Just need to smooth, keep this fabric a bit taut and smooth it out. So gentle sideways pressure. Because it's so easy for this to all to sort of ruffle up and you end up stitching in little tucks of fabric, which never looks good. Now, when I come down to here, I need to just press this additional fabric down, get rid of this bump. I'm not going to worry too much at the moment about little bumps. I can use my crack and pick or the end of your scissors to hold the fabric down if you want to. If you do get a tuck at this stage, it's not too drastic because this is just tacking. I'm still going to leave this pin in if I can. Now, I should be safe to take it out now, but notice immediately the pin came out, the finger went down to hold things in place. 1 stitch beyond the end of the tape, turn, pivot, and across the bottom. Now, no back stitching required because this is just tacking and we want to be able to take it out. So that it's a bit wonky, but the critical thing, especially this end, oh dear, right, glad that's happened because that is what I want to avoid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip back over and put a few more stitches in here just to hold this bit down. However, the rest is fine. You can see I've stitched through 3 layers, the seam allowance is held in place. So let me just flip over and put another few stitches in that. So I have put a few more stitches in here, you can see them there. I haven't even bothered taking this out, it doesn't matter, I'll take that out later. And when we look over to the other side, the zip is now securely held in place within the seam allowance. Right, now for the next stage. Now we're going to go back in and do the actual stitching around the zip. So tension back to my regular tension, about 4 on the top thread, stitch length back to 2.5 millimetres, sorry. Now it should be mentioned actually with this shape of zip foot, I'll just say this first. To do your first lot of tacking here, you may want to use the back edge of the zip against the tape, and that will keep the needle away from the tape, thereby leaving space for you to do the actual stitching. But when you do the actual stitching, you can get in closer, so you can use the front edge of the foot and that will get you closer to the tape. However, at the straight-sided foot, you can utilise your needle position. And because I want to get right in here now, I am going to move my needle. So to move my needle, I'm going to go to my stitch width dial, and it's often the stitch width dial that controls the swing of your needle. So I'm going to move it over to the left position. If you have a computerised machine, you'll tap a couple of buttons and that will also move your needle position. So I'm going to go back in. Now I can get a bit closer to the tape and I can complete my zip. Now, to secure your stitching, obviously normally you would do reverse stitching. And when you reverse, it creates a thicker line. And if it's anywhere on the top, you may not want to see that thick line. It can be a bit unsightly. To be honest, on the back of a cushion, I actually couldn't care less. But I'll show you the tip anyway. So what I'm going to do is position my fabric so that the needle is starting off right in the seam. Okay. I don't know if you can see that, but the needle looks just like the needle is emerging from the seam. Now, I'm not going to reverse. I'm just going to start sewing. I'm going to do a few stitches across the short end of the tape. And again, one stitch past the tape. Needle in, pivot. And again, I'm lined up to come right down the edge of the tape. This time, because the tacking is holding everything in place, we don't have that fabric creating a ridge. And right now, I'm not stitching on the tape, just parallel to it. Right, now you can see the problem. I've got this big lump. So it caused an issue last time and pushed my needle out to the side. It's almost certainly going to cause even more of an issue this time because I'm that much closer. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to get rid of the zip pull. However, we can't because the zip opening is actually still stitched closed. So I'm going to again use my little trick, put the needle in to hold everything in place. I can now open up this tacking here. So this is the tacking that we put in initially, the very first row of stitching. So I can now just open up. So notice I'm being careful. I'm using my very small pointed end scissors because it is very easy to snip the fabric. I wonder how I know that. So you can use your quick unpick as well. Again, if you are using a quick unpick, make sure that you can see where the point is coming out. Okay, make sure you can see the point and that you're just cutting the threads. Don't stick it in and just push. But I'm just taking that back to 1 inch or 2 behind the foot, just so I have enough space to open the zip beyond the foot. I now have a lovely flat area which I can sew and complete that seam. Again, 1 stitch beyond, turn, pivot, and I can complete my short end. And again, I'm just going to finish with the needle just right in that seam. And again, I'm also leaving tails that I can tie off. So that is good, I'm quite happy with that. I can take the tape off. Now you see the stitching here. I've used this beautiful bright pink thread, which you can see here. This tacking come out. So I can snip and just pull. Oh, that went well, didn't it? Now, if you have loosened your top tension, getting this tacking out should be much easier. So you should, in theory, be able just to pull it out in short sections. Anyway, so nothing more boring than watching paint dry, than watching someone taking out tacking. So I'm going to do that later. I'll show you, however. I'll just take this bit out and take this bit out so you can see what's happening at the ends. Right, so there we have our little tail thread. So I'm going to take this, and if you go to the back, there's the bobbin thread. Pull on the bobbin thread, and this loop that creates, pull that through, and that's your top thread. It's been pulled all the way through, and you can then tie these off or sew them in. And that's how you secure your thread without having to do reversing. Just tie those in an overhand knot. And do the same at the other end. So again, go to the bobbin thread, give it a yank, find the loop, pull the loop, tie them off. There's my tacking, which can come out. So let me come back to you when I've finished taking all the tacking out. Right, now I have removed all the tacking. I have my zip closure, stitching both short ends, lovely straight stitching right to the middle. The zip is completely hidden underneath a little flap. No swearing, no blood or tears spilt, and just lots of impressed friends. If anyone points out that I haven't matched the pattern, they're not getting invited back to my house. Have fun, happy cushions. Thank you for watching.